Oh, the music stopped. Hey, everybody, it's corn silage season. I'm Jeff Jackson. What's the perfect moisture? Do we need a pack tractor? Do we skip inoculant this year? We're going to talk about that here in a few minutes. Jeff here, the Forage fanatic, and my co-host, Jonathan.
Hey, I'm Jonathan Folsom, technical seed agronomist with WinField United. I get to work with a lot of forage producers across the western U.S., but today I've got the fun task of wrangling Jeff Jackson in this discussion on corn silage. So Jeff, let's get started. What is the most important thing to worry about when chopping corn silage?
Hey, Jonathan, since you asked, moisture is probably the one thing that we need to focus in on the most. So we have different things going on out there across that thing. And really, we need to try to hit that silage harvest window somewhere between 60 and 70%. And so let's look at a slide here to talk about what happens. So we shoot for 65% as our goal. And then as we look at the parameters of what happens when we're too high on that moisture. So we got a slide to show us that as well. And basically, once we get above 70% moisture or less than 30% dry matter, you're going to have a reduced yield, obviously, because the plant's not mature yet. We're not setting up a bunch of kernel weight. We could have reduced starch content. Again, as that kernel matures, we add more starch to the kernel. People will see an increase in seepage if we get over 70%. You will probably have a high acid profile in that pile, and you're going to have some aerobic instability. So we want to make sure we get that moisture as close as we can. Now you see a note on here about sorghum going up to about 72%. We'll address that again in a little bit, but we can chop that a little bit wetter. Now, if you go on the opposite side and you get too dry, obviously we get too mature corn. We have starch digestibility issues. We have fiber digestibility issues. As we get that mature, we have a hard time with kernel processing. And then our stover particle size, or the stalk and the leaves, start to get a little stringy. When we get too dry and big particle size, we have poor packing. So we don't do good with our cubic feet per pounds per cubic feet. I lost my mind for a second there. And then we have poor silage fermentation. So once we get those pieces right, again, that's really where we need to focus, is somewhere between 60 and 70%. Our target's 65. We'd love 68. So that's a little detail there.
So, Jeff, you made a really good point about moisture, and somebody might argue with you that maturity is more important, because they may want to make sure that kernel's not mature, that they get that kernel able to splatter it and get it broken up, and they might actually be getting it chopped too wet, too moist. And of course, that leads to some of those challenges that you just mentioned. So, if somebody was to ask me what's more important, I mean, isn't really maturity more important because you're focused on quality? And I'm going to say no. It's absolutely most important to preserve the feed that you grew, so that the cows can eat it and not make them sick in the process. Having good quality feed is great, but we definitely have to preserve it. So that's key. And keep in mind that the maturity, the moisture is going to change as you go across that field. So test, you're going to hear that word again several times, right, Jeff? Test as we go through the field, as you're checking moisture. But you mentioned fermentation, and so let's talk about preservatives and inoculation for just a minute. So is an inoculant and a preservative, is that something we should consider all the time or part of the time, or how's that? What do you think?
So you're going to get different feedback from all parts of the country. People have their opinions and preferences. In order for us to preserve the best feed possible, I personally think that there's a great place for inoculants and preservatives. And how we decide how to use or which one to use would basically tell us that, we have different field conditions. If we have a very healthy crop, like I have represented behind me here, we can use an inoculant because they work really, really well between 60 and 70% moisture. We get good fermentation, and we need an inoculant for fermentation. If we get a field that's all out of whack, maybe it has differing soil types out there, maybe you had a hail event, a drown out spot, maybe it's been really droughty. We've had a lot of conversation about the drought monitor map. When we get outside the good parameters for pile moisture, we need to consider a preservative so we can pickle that pile and limit, basically stop the molds, yeast, and bacteria from growing in that pile. So there's a lot of times people use the word inoculant synonymous for both, but we have a difference in the industry. Please ask questions, and if you need to consult somebody, ask some questions and make sure you're getting the right one used.
I think that's a really good point. And Jeff, I'm admiring those different packing tractors, miniature packing tractors you've gotten in front of you. And I can tell, the audience is appreciating your carpet farming skills. I want to remind everybody about the importance of packing. So I've got this little saying called pack a little, pack a lot. And it's really pack a little with a lot. So pack a little bit of silage with a lot of packing tractors. So there's almost no such thing as packing too much compaction in the corn silage pit. Now we know soil compaction is definitely an enemy when we're trying to grow the corn, but think of compaction as your friend when you're piling that silage up. It helps squeeze all that air out, and air is really one of the biggest enemies to preserving that pile, preserving that feed in the first place. So make sure you get it covered, get it airtight, and prevent that spoilage. But Jeff, you mentioned drought monitor, and there's some places that are definitely drier than others for sure. So what considerations would you have that you would add specifically when we're talking about drought stressed corn?
So yeah, one of the big things to watch out for, everybody, and you're probably well aware of it, but it's the nitrate level. So we intended to have a beautiful corn crop out there, and if we have a drought, we didn't utilize the nitrogen out there. The plant probably picked up that nitrate or nitrogen in a nitrate form and didn't get to use it because the weather shut it down. So we've got a nice chart to show us here a little bit about how that's stacked up in the plant. So most of the nitrates are going to be stored in the lower third of the stalk. So as you look at this chart, when you go from the middle of the stalk up through the rest of the plant, there's really not much nitrate in there. And also there's another scale. So if you do some testing, we mentioned test already, you're going to see another slide that shows us the different test levels. So you might get a chart back that looks like this. So you're going to go out, I would suggest test before you chop. So can we raise the cutter head to leave more of the nitrates in the field? The other good thing about this whole process, Jonathan, is that once we go through proper fermentation, which we talked about moisture levels, packing, making a good pile, if we go through a good fermentation, we can reduce 30 to 40% of those nitrates that we just showed in the last slide to help us decide how to manage that pile. Because if you work with your nutritionist, and I'm sure the Purina Animal Nutrition guys would love to help you decide how to make the proper TMR or blend, because the solution to pollution is dilution. If you end up with a high nitrate pile, how do we need to blend that back down with other feedstuffs to get it fed through livestock and have a healthier feed system?
Jeff, I think one of the other key tools that we have to manage these drought acres is planning for next year. Sorghum is a really drought tolerant crop, and it may dry down a little bit slower. So, when you think about Croplan having just an elite forage sorghum lineup, I think it's as good as anybody's in the world. So how would you manage a forage sorghum silage crop differently than corn?
So there's a couple things. Earlier we mentioned that you could go up to about 72% moisture and still get good crop fermentation. I would suggest that if guys have irrigation, so we can't shut Mother Nature off. So rain-fed fields on dry land, you get what you get. But if you're irrigating and you get head emergence, please shut the irrigator off so that plant can utilize the moisture around it and what's in the soil there to finish off that grain, dry the plant down, because if we continue to irrigate, we're going to have a moisture issue when we would like to harvest. If you need to go clip that crop, and my point would be is if you need to use the mower, put it in a windrow, wilt it for a couple days, then chop. It's not a popular answer, but if you need to manage moisture so you can harvest on your schedule versus Mother Nature, you might have to do that. So a couple little things in there about sorghum that are a little different than corn. Otherwise, the rest of the program is very, very similar. We need good moisture. We need to pack it right, maybe use an inoculant and a preservative.
Yep, I agree. And I don't like recommending the guys to mow stuff down and make an extra trip, swath it down just to wilt it. It makes a whole lot more sense to shut down the sprinkler, stop irrigating, like you said, stop irrigating when that head comes out. and you'll be much better off in that. So, yeah. So, Jeff, as we wrap up this discussion, all of this is based on growing good feed, right? But the foundation of growing good feed starts with strong seed selection. And I like to think with Croplan having such a great relationship with Forage genetics and Purina animal nutrition, we're really focused on not only delivering great quality, but also great yield at the same time. So Croplan is really committed to growing, like I said, good quality and good tonnage at the same time. And we execute that through lots of testing, through our rigorous testing platforms that we've got to prove it and make sure it's really good before we put it in a Croplan bag.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've said this 2 or 3 times already, and you mentioned testing again. So I'm going to bring it up as we close here and remind everybody, test the moisture, test for nitrates. If you haven't done that and you're wondering or doubting, it is simple and very economical to take a moisture or nitrate test. Know where you're at, know what you're doing. You can't monitor it if you don't measure it. So with that, test. Did I say test?
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. And that's all the time we have for today. But if anybody would like any more information or talk about corn silage, we'd love to chat with you one-on-one. You can click the link below and send your contact information, and we'll be happy to chat with you. Also, go visit winfieldunited.com/Total Acre Live, and also go visit winfieldunited.com. But you can also check us out on your channels. Jeff, tell them about it.
So I do a YouTube channel and a Twitter handle at the Forage Fanatic. So if you can find me at either one of those, or Jeffrey Jackson on Facebook.
Fantastic. And you can follow me on YouTube at Seed Agronomy Insights or Twitter, Johnny Agronomy. Sorry, it's at Agronomy Johnny. But for WinField United, I'm Jonathan Folsom. He's Jeff Jackson, and we thank you for your business.
Go get at it.